Welcome to the Flower Farm Sampler Quilt-Along series. I'm Shelley Kavana, author of the Flower Farm Sampler book, and it's my mission to help you make stunning quilts simply. If we haven't met before, I'm a quilt pattern and cross-stitch designer. I design fabric and I write quilting books like the Barnstar Sampler and the Flower Farm Sampler. You can find my patterns, fabrics, and books at your favorite local quilt shop, or you can find them online at our website at chorusquilts.com. You can also follow our quilty adventures on social media under the tag @ChorusQuilts. In our Flower Farm Sampler Quilt-Along series, we'll be working through all 18 blocks from my Flower Farm Sampler book, spread out over 12 months. To sew along with us, you'll need your fabric and the book. In these videos, also assume that you've prepped and cut your fabric pieces following the book's instructions. To make the blocks in the book, you won't need any specialty rulers, foundation paper piecing, or templates. Most of the blocks use my favorite stitch and flip techniques to create complex geometric designs with simple shapes. A few of our blocks do include triangles, which will piece oversized and trimmed down to perfection. All the stitch and flip basics are also covered on pages 10 through 13 of your book, so you'll definitely want to bookmark that section for handy reference. Instead of starting with block 1 and working our way chronologically through the book, we're going to begin with our smaller 8-inch blocks. This way we can practice techniques on a manageable scale before tackling our larger and more complicated blocks. You'll find our complete schedule, my list of must-have and nice-to-have tool recommendations, and a free downloadable block checklist so you can keep track of your progress, all on our Quilt-Along homepage. We've left the link to that in the description box below. In today's video, we're assembling our Starflower block, which is block number 13 in your book. If you're sewing along with us, we'll also be tackling the Bellflower later this month, since both blocks use similar stitch and flip techniques. The Bellflower tutorial drops next week, so make sure you're subscribed to our channel and you've turned on your notifications. This Starflower block is going to serve as our deep dive into stitch and flip techniques, which are some of my favorite quilting methods for creating complex geometric shapes using only squares and rectangles. We won't encounter any bias edges. These units don't use any triangles, and we won't need any specialty rulers. The Starflower block is essentially a 9-patch block, with 9 elements arranged in a 3x3 grid. At the center, we have a square and a square unit, surrounded by 4 flying geese units, plus simple corner squares to complete the design. In today's video, we'll practice our stitch and flip techniques to make both the square and square and flying geese units before assembling everything together. And remember, if you're new to any of these techniques, be sure to practice with scrap fabric first before using the actual fabric for your quilt top. The flying geese unit is easily one of the most recognizable shapes in quilting. It features a larger center triangle, often called the goose, with 2 smaller triangles or sky pieces sewn to either side. The resulting unit is a rectangle whose finished size is twice as long as it is tall. There are probably more than a dozen different ways to make these units with specialty rulers or templates or foundation patterns. But my goal for this series, and really my goal as a teacher, is to help you make stunning quilts simply. So in today's video, I'm sharing my favorite stitch and flip method for creating flat, accurate flying geese blocks without a lot of fuss. We call this the stitch and flip technique because when you join a square to the corner of a larger background piece using a diagonal seam, you can trim your excess fabric away and then simply flip the remaining triangle into place. It is a lovely way to insert a corner into a piece without actually sewing any triangles or having to deal with any stretchy bias edges. For our Flying Geese unit, each unit is made up using 2 squares and a rectangle. And in addition to your fabric, you'll also need some sort of a rotary ruler and a temporary marking tool. Marking tool that you use is really very super important. There are loads of products on the market, so be sure that you're selecting a marking tool that is temporary. My personal favorite is this 3-in-1 ceramic pencil from Sewline. The pencil has pink, white, and black ceramic lead all in one casing, so that you always have the right color of lead on hand for whatever color fabric you're using. And it also comes with a handy eraser built right into the tip if you need one. If this pencil isn't available to you, you can also use any kind of water-soluble marker, something that's easily erasable. The lines that we'll be drawing are on the wrong sides of our fabric, but they are our seam lines, which means there could be a slight chance that those lines could bleed through to the front of your fabric. With ceramic pencils, you don't have to worry about the bleed, and any bleeding from water-soluble markers will dissolve with a few spritzes of water. Please note that we do not recommend using thermosensitive gel pens, as the ink might look like it has disappeared, but it actually remains in your fabric and can reappear over time. For the Flying Geese units in our star block, we're going to start by marking our stitching lines on the wrong sides of all of our A squares. Using my ceramic pencil, I'm drawing a diagonal line from corner to corner on the wrong side of the A square. You can use any straight edge ruler you'd like to mark your lines, but I do want to draw your attention to how I'm positioning my pencil. I'm lining up my pencil lead, not the edge of the ruler, with the corners of the A square. The number one mistake I see with the stitch and flip technique is people lining their rulers up with the corners of their blocks. But if you line the ruler up with the corner, then your seam is actually going to be offset from that corner by the width of your pencil lead. So set yourself up for success by making sure that it's your pencil lead lined up with your true corner, and then draw your line. Because both the Flying Geese units in this section and the square and square units in the next section use A square for their corner pieces, you can save yourself a little bit of time and go ahead and mark all of your A squares for both steps at once here. And just a reminder, if you need to revisit this technique while you're piecing your blocks, you can find our full pictorial Flying Geese tutorial in your Flower Farm sampler book in the Stitch and Flip Basics sections on page 11. Once you've marked all of your squares, you're simply going to place a marked square right sides together on top of that base rectangle. For this block, that's our C rectangle. And just make sure that you're lining up the corners and the edges of your square and rectangle. You can pin everything in place to secure it, or you could glue baste it by adding a tiny dab of washable glue in the corner that we're going to trim off after sewing, or you can just hold your fabric in place, whatever feels most natural and works best for your personal sewing practices. And it doesn't matter whether you start at the left end or the right end of your rectangle. When you're finished, your block will look the same either way. So simply sew on the marked line once you have your pieces in place. Since we have multiple blocks to piece, I'm saving myself a little bit of time by chain piecing. Once I've finished one seam, I just take a couple of stitches past the edge of the block, and then I start sewing my next block without snipping my thread. This way, I can do all of my trimming and pressing for all of my Flying Geese units at once. So once you've finished sewing the first half of your blocks, you snip your threads if you've chain pieced, and you're ready to start trimming and pressing. We need to trim away the excess corner fabric for each unit, leaving a 1/4 inch between the seam and the cut edge. You can absolutely use your rotary ruler and cutter and measure exactly a 1/4 inch if that's what you're most comfortable with, but I find that this takes a little bit of unnecessary extra time. Instead, I prefer to just trim them by hand. I'm eyeballing my 1/4 inch seams, but this is the back of the block, so it's not necessary to trim things down to an exact 1/4 inch. You can save your resulting triangle trimmings. They're a little small for this block, but you could absolutely repurpose them later as scraps or leader and ender pieces, or for some sort of a mini half square triangle project if you'd like. After trimming your units, you're ready to start pressing. In general, I prefer to press my seams directionally towards the corner units. If you get your best results by pressing your seams open, you can absolutely do that as well. I like to press with a hot, dry iron with no steam. And I like to press my units while they're still closed to set the seam first. Then I use my fingertips to move the corners into place before pressing with the iron. I am also pressing on a felted wool pressing mat, and this mat absorbs the heat from the iron and reflects it back into the backside of my block. So I'm essentially pressing the block from both sides, which gives me really superbly flat blocks. After you've finished pressing, you're ready to attach your second corner using the same technique you used for the first. You just want to make sure that the stitch line on the second square is crossing over the previous seam by a 1/4 inch at the edge of your block, rather than running parallel to it. Finish stitching. Then, to finish your flying geese units, separate your chains if you were chain piecing, trim your seam allowances down to a 1/4 inch, and press, just like we did with the first corner. And there we have our complete flying geese units. Our second building block in our starflower block is a square in a square unit. Sometimes this is called a diamond in a square unit as well. And this unit features a center square set on point, surrounded by corner triangles. These square in a square blocks use the exact same stitch and flip technique we just mastered with our flying geese units. The only differences are that instead of a background rectangle, we're using a larger background square, and instead of adding 2 corners, we'll be adding 4. If you didn't mark them earlier, mark your stitching lines on the wrong sides of your remaining A squares. Same technique, lining up your pencil lead, not your ruler, with the corners. Place a marked A square right sides together with one corner of your B square, making sure you line up those corners. Then stitch on the marked line. Once you've finished stitching that first corner, we can be super efficient and go ahead and attach the opposite corner as well before trimming and pressing. This helps maintain the block's stability and does prevent some distortion as we're pressing. Trim both corners with the same 1/4 inch seam allowance we used before and press towards the corner triangles. To finish the block, we'll repeat the process for the remaining 2 corners. Stitch the opposite corners, trim, and press. When you're finished, you'll have a perfect little square in a square unit with your B square appearing to be rotated 45 degrees or on point, framed by the 4A triangles. And there we have our square and square units ready to become the center of our starflower block. Now we've gotten to the satisfying part where we are going to put all of those blocks that we've worked so carefully on together into our finished block. We'll start out by laying our building blocks along with the D squares in 3 rows of 3 pieces each, as shown in your book. Make sure that the peaks on the flying geese units are all pointed towards the points on the square in the square unit. First, we're going to sew all of these units together into rows. The top and bottom rows don't have any seams or points to match up, so they're really quick to sew together. With the middle row, we need to do our best to get the peaks of our flying geese units to kiss the points of our on-point squares without cutting either point off. The easiest way to do this is with some super sharp extra fine pins, like my favorite Clover glass head pins. And to keep our points aligned, I'm going to pin them together by passing the pin from wrong side to right side at the seam intersection of a flying geese unit. Then I'm going to pass the same pin from right side to wrong side through the corner of that on-point square. At this point, some people prefer to just stitch with the pin kind of dangling but still marking the spot, but I prefer to go a step further and secure my pin. Notice that I'm being really careful to not shift my fabric or my points around that I've just worked so hard to match up. Once you've matched your points, you're ready to start stitching. You might find that using a tailor's awl or a stiletto is very helpful in preventing seams from folding back over on themselves as you sew. You're going to keep stitching until just before the point you've marked with your pin, and then remove the pin. Don't sew over it. And as you continue to sew, you want the needle of your machine to pass just a thread's width or 2 above the place you marked with your pin. Finish your seam, then repeat the process to attach the second flying geese unit to the opposite side. Before you head to the iron, take a quick peek at your points to make sure that you're happy with how they met. If you've accidentally cut off a point, you don't have to rip out the entire seam. Just pop out 6 or 7 stitches along both sides of the problem area, then repin and re-sew. Once you've finished joining all of your pieces into rows, you are ready to press. I personally get my best results from pressing my seams directionally and having my points nest rather than pressing them open. But remember, if you prefer pressing your seams open, you can do that as well. The assembly diagrams in the book do share my pressing suggestions. So for this block, we're suggesting pressing the seams in the top and bottom rows towards the exterior of the block, and pressing the seams in the center row towards the interior. One of the reasons that I like piecing with an 80 weight cottonized polyester thread is that the polyester thread is much skinnier than 50 weight cotton. Thinner thread means flatter seams, which means that even though this middle row has some bulk in its seams, it's still possible to get it to lay fairly flat. And remember that the pressing instructions in the book are just suggestions, not hard and fast rules, so you should press in whatever manner personally gives you the best result. Finish the block by joining all of the rows together. Take your time to match your points between the square in a square units and the flying geese units. If you pressed the seams in your rows directionally, then the seams between your rows will nest. To do this, you want to first line up the edges of your rows and then sort of slide the seam intersections towards one another until they butt right up against one another. Secure with pins to keep everything in place, and then line up your second nested seam intersection. Then you are ready to sew, press, and finish your block. Join us next week for our bell flower block tutorial. We'll be using some of these same stitch and flip techniques to make that block so you are already ahead of the game. Thanks so much for sewing along with me today. You can post your photos in our Flower Farm Sampler Quilt Along Facebook group or on Instagram and Blue Sky using hashtag Flower Farm Sampler. And be sure to tag us at Chorus Quilts so that we can see your beautiful work too. Don't forget to grab your free Flower Farm Sampler checklist. You can find the link for the free download in the description box below. If you've enjoyed this tutorial, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more quilting videos. Hit the bell icon for notifications when we post new tutorials. Happy sewing, and we'll see you next time with another Flower Farm Sampler block.